And they also knew him as a person. So I would really like to introduce John Pettibone and Peter Anastas. It's going to be a dual lecture, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Back to the mid-50s. And I can speak about Wilson as I knew him. I was working at the time, I was 18 years old. It was between my freshman and sophomore year in college. And I had worked since I was 14 years old, writing for the Gloucester Times. And so I was offered the job, a summer job, between my first and second year in college as the editor of the Cape Ann Summer Sun. The Cape Ann Summer Sun was founded by the man who later bought the Gloucester Times and created the Essex County newspapers, Philip Weld. He was a career newspaper person. He'd worked at the Chicago Tribune, he'd worked in the Paris Tribune, and he came to Gloucester, and what Phil wanted to do was to have a literate newspaper. And not a newspaper that was a gossip sheet, and not a newspaper that just had local news. And Phil was particularly interested in what was happening and had happened for many years on Cape Ann and the visual arts. So we were all encouraged, those of us who worked for the paper, to involve ourselves in the visual arts. As a young reporter and as editor of the Cape Ann Summer Sun, I got to meet many artists and writers at the time and got to understand the world of contemporary art. I had not studied art. I learned about art as I was writing about it. Oftentimes getting in trouble. Oftentimes criticizing Bing and I while working together at the Cape Ann Museum. We found a review that I'd written when I was 18 years old, attacking a young woman painter, and then Bing looked her up, and what did you find?
Oh, she's quite famous now in San Francisco.
And so I wrote my first article about the show at the Cape Ann Society of Modern Artists, which had started summers at the Hawthorne Inn Casino in East Gloucester, and then moved here to Rockport, to Redlands Hall. And I was very, very excited about the paintings that I saw painted by a person of this very strange name, Pico Miran. And I wondered who he was. And I soon found out, because right after I had written about one of the shows at CASMA, I received both a personal letter from him, and one that he had written to the Gloucester Times, thanking us for having written about his work, but entering a caveat. I'm not a surrealist. I'm not a surrealist, he said. I'm being compared to Dali, he said, whom I knew in Paris. But he said the comparison is not correct. And what happened is that Wilson wrote a series of extraordinary letters to the Gloucester Times, which I will get to in just a second, in which he explained his work to the readers of the paper. And these were not short notes. These letters, they were not short notes. I will show you. First of all, this shows you how big the pages of the Gloucester Times were in the 1950s. And Wilson wrote a long letter and to the editor. And the editor, this was before I was the editor, a year before, his name was John Bethel. And he was John Updike's classmate at Harvard. And they, and a lifelong friend of John Updike, and an extraordinarily bright and interesting guy. So he headlines Pico Miran's letter, "We stand corrected." And the letter takes up a very large part. And I'll read a couple little sentences from it in a bit. It takes up it. So this is kind of like the context. Pico Moran writes, I answer, and I'm invited to meet him at his apartment, really a couple of rooms, at the Bradford Building on Main Street in Gloucester, across the street from where the W.G. Brown department store was, which is now known as Brown's Mall. Well, the Bradford Building was one of these extraordinary 19th century red brick buildings. There were so many in Gloucester, so many, and they were so beautiful. They were torn down during the period of urban renewal. Charles Olson referred to it as renewal by destruction. Mm-hmm. And I knew that building because in that building was an optometrist named Dr. Savage. Winslow Wilson, Pico Miran would have loved the fact that in the building that he lived there was an optometrist named Savage. But these rooming houses, and there were 100 of them at the time in Gloucester, were where single men and women lived. They were known as single room occupancies. Some people cooked on hot plates in them. Some people took their meals out. Winslow Wilson took his meals out, and I know that because he told me. And it was possible at that time. There was a delicatessen, wonderful on Main Street. There was the Gloucester Hotel. There were some just wonderful restaurants and coffee shops and places where one could eat. So even though Wilson, Pico Miran, was a reclusive person, by living in the center of Gloucester, in a very large building where many, many other people lived. Next door was Sears and Roebuck. Diagonally across the street was Epstein's art supply store. He had everything he needed to do his work, even though he could live a more of a secluded life. So I go to meet him. This is in the summer of 1956, and I'm 18 years old. And I'm meeting Pico Miran. I knew nothing about Winslow Wilson at the time. I knew nothing about the two names, the two visions of art, the two identities. So I meet this gentleman who's wearing a brown beret, very conventionally dressed, very well spoken, and I'm not shown the paintings. As I've written in the catalog, I can smell turpentine and linseed oil in the rooms, but I'm not shown anything. And he presents himself to me as if he were and was Pico Miran. So we talked about him in those terms, and in terms of this art that he created under that name. He wanted very much to explain himself, and went to pains, as you will discover, walking through the exhibition. He wrote a great deal about his own work. He wrote a great deal about the traditional work, the seascapes, the portraits, but he also wrote a great deal about the work that he did, which he called postmodern art. And let me read to you, just very briefly, from this letter sent to the Gloucester Times in August of 1954. And he's talking about how different he is from Salvatore Dali, and that he's not a surrealist. Again, Dali narrowed the entire range of possible symbolical meanings to so-called super realities of Freudian sexual innuendo. Now this is a guy writing to the Gloucester Times. I, on the other hand, searched for realities of the present. I'm thinking about these as I look around. Searched for realities of the present and seriously tried to live up to the implications of being an artist of our age. I think it's very interesting the way he wants to place himself. Now look again at my picture in the Casma show at Redmond's Hall, MerryGoRound. It's a new and personal vision of the four horsemen of the apocalypse as they rode daily through the ruined cities of our world. The four horsemen are real in this world, but they are invisible essences. I cannot paint them as actually seen with the eye, but I can paint my attitude toward them, my reaction to their reality, the emotional effects of the fantastic horror that contemplation of death, war, pestilence, and famine have produced upon my aesthetic sensibility. It follows that nothing in the picture is to be taken literally. Everything is a symbol, and all the symbols are put together as a narrative landscape of the mind, which art lovers can read according to their experience. That is the clearest description that I can share with you of what Wilson was trying to do in these postmodern paintings. And he says one more thing which is fascinating: to dig deep into the sources of my style. Now this he's writing to Gloucester, he's telling us what he does, how he does it, what to look for. To dig deep into the sources of my style, I owe nearly everything to the writer whom many Europeans consider America's foremost literary critic, Edmund Wilson. In Axel's Castle, 1938, Mr. Wilson predicted, quote, "And so we may see naturalism and symbolism combine to provide us with a vision of human life and its universe, richer, more subtle, more complex, and more complete than any that man has known. Indeed, they have already so combined symbolism, symbolism has already rejoined naturalism in one great work of literature, James Joyce's Ulysses." So Wilson, as you may know, studied at Harvard in a very, very famous class that included the poet E.E. Cummings, with whom he was very close, the great, great novelist John Dos Passos, the poet and William Blake scholar S. Foster Damon, who lived in Anastas and taught for many years at Brown. These were some of Wilson's friends and classmates at Harvard, and Wilson also edited the Harvard literary magazine, the Harvard Monthly. So, listening to his voice, you can see that literary education that he received. One more quick excerpt. In 1950, when Wilson showed these postmodern paintings for the first time at the American Gallery of Art in New York, he wrote a manifesto in which he described his life as an artist, art as he saw it, as it was happening in the world, in America at the time, and what he was trying to do. And one of the things that moved me incredibly in that manifesto, he says, "Stung by the bitterness which I had known as a worker myself, I conceived industrial civilization to be an unconscious confession of the guilt of man, who had relegated God to build an earthly paradise unaided and had only succeeded in making a hell and condemning himself to it, there to live, an insensible, broken thing perceived crawling indistinctly deeper into fatally alluring abysses of the machine. Now, you look at some of these paintings, and the ones down here and upstairs, it's an extraordinary description of what he was trying to do. At any rate, Wilson wrote, as I've said, very explicitly about the work. He wanted viewers to understand where it came from, how he went about conceiving it. He wrote about it with incredible acuity. And as you go through the show, many of you have been through it already, and you'll probably be going through it again. Look at, and the curating has been so wonderful. Look at the excerpts from Wilson's writing and see how they compare to the paintings themselves. Do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to say before John takes over? Maybe later then, after John talks. Thank you very much. Yes, Sarah.
So did you only meet him on that one occasion as Pico Miran, or did you meet him again?
I, for several years, did not know there was a Winslow Wilson. I always knew him as Pico Moran. We wrote to each other. I went off to college. We corresponded. I came back from school. Even when I was not editing the paper, I saw him from time to time. And then I began to put things that he said together. My friend Winslow Wilson has said. And then I said to him, I said, "Are you Winslow Wilson?" He said yes. Very shyly, he said to me, "I'm Winslow Wilson." And this was maybe after I'd known him for about 3 years. But the friendship continued. We had a very, I was leaving to study in Europe for 3 years in Italy. And he invited me to lunch at the Gloucester Hotel, which is no longer, another beautiful place, gone in the ravages of urban renewal. He apparently took his meals there very often. And as I've written, we had chicken croquettes, which are very, very good, an old New England staple. And we talked and talked and talked. And then I went off to Europe. We did not correspond while I was in Europe, but then I came back and the friendship continued, but he became more and more remote. And this was into the 70s, and then he left Gloucester. And we later learned that he went and lived first in New York and then in Florida. And then Claudia, did he die in Florida?
Yes.
He died in Florida. So that's
Thank you.
well, thank you for asking. So John, are we going upstairs?
Well, I'm going to start with the same mid-60s.
Okay.
And I'm going to start knowing him as Winslow Wilson, not this other gentleman. And then I'm going to talk a little bit, thank you for reminding me about chicken croquettes at Oleana's, which was one of their favorites. We're going to do this upstairs because I want to set the scene for twice a week portrait sketch groups and how he ran them and who attended, and talk a little bit about how that worked with this amazing man. And I want to tell you why I have half glasses, so come join me. Sounds in this floor that I recognize. 1965 through 1972, when we spent a lot of wonderful hours in here sketching. And classes were Wednesday nights, 7 to 10. They were Saturday afternoons, 2 to 5. And Winslow Wilson, you could hear the Congregational Church clock chime. There was a clock on this wall so you knew exactly what time it was. He was precise to the
Great.
second. There was a raised platform, the model was here. There was a little tiny metal cabinet down there by that painting in the middle of the wall that contained backdrops. These were various pieces of cloth, and somehow Earl Merchant, who was his assistant, and Earl was a lawyer in Gloucester, and Earl painted what I would call, if we had a grandma Moses, we had a grandpa Moses. Earl Merchant, because he painted these rather primitive studies of people, right down to their shoes and socks. And it was a wonderful experience. And just to explain, you have Priscilla Trotter, an amazing watercolorist, sitting here, who would do a very detailed sketch of the model and then paint it in. You have Doris Goodhue and Mildred Jones. And God bless the man, back in that corner would be Jack Callahan with an easel and a full-size canvas that he had lugged in here from his studio down on South Street. But he had himself positioned, literally, here's the corner, the easel was here and he's back here working. And he had himself blocked in with the cabinet right here so that you couldn't get to him. You could not see what Mr. Callahan was painting. And every now and then Jack Callahan would take a break to go down and use the facilities. And I couldn't get up fast enough to get behind there to see what he was doing. And once he came in, I remember it was, I think it was a Wednesday night, he came in and there were 3 people huddled looking at his painting, and he took the painting off and went home. Because he did not want people to see what he was doing. Now let me sit down. Indeed, Mr. Wilson. Winslow Wilson was here. Earl Merchant was here. I have to get out a prop. Sorry to do this, but this was where the model would look. And if the person was seated there, this might be attached over here, on that door, over on that edge. And he would instruct the model not to stare, but to simply look in that direction. And how do I know this? Well, I came to work here in 1969, and from 1969, I want to say to 72, possibly, invariably, Saturday afternoons, the model did not show up. We had the hand on the clock up here that was fast approaching 2, and then it got to 2, and then it got to 5 after 2. And I'm in that office working, and Winslow would come in. I hate to ask, but the model is not showing up. Would you pose? 5 times in 4 years, I was the model. And he couldn't be nicer to the model because he would be right here and he'd say, now I want you just to get comfortable. And he had a piece of chalk and he would mark where my shoes were. And make sure you have your hands a certain way, and you might have them this way. But after the break, I might forget the position and I might do it this way, and he would very cordially correct me. But then Earl Merchant sitting next to him, they would argue about which digit was which digit. And invariably, particularly on Wednesday nights from 7 to 10, at the end of the session, he would come to me and say, I need a taxi. Because the fight they had had was so abrupt that he did not want Earl Merchant to give him a ride back. And I offered, but he knew I had a Volkswagen Bug and he didn't think that even 2 people could fit in there. So I would call him a taxi to get him home. But because I offered a number of times out of pure curiosity, I wanted to know where he lived. Where is, I mean, you know these things, isn't that amazing? You and I have to get together and figure this one out, because I never did find that out. But literally with that clock, at 2 minutes after 7, after he had you posed, It was the voice that came from out of the blue. The model is posing. And there was utter silence. Like a minute. Remember one Saturday afternoon, Doris Goodhue and Mildred Jones were discussing someone's painting and they kept talking. And he said, the model is posing. And he had a way of looking at you when he got upset, which was this eye kind of started to close. And I mean, I was like this, you know. But we got a lot of work done. And at those breaks, we were able to go around and see what other people were doing, with the exception of Jack Callahan. We never got to see that, but we were able to share how people saw the model. And it was amazing. I want to say probably 80% of the paintings in this exhibit, I know these people. And it's you know, I mean, you know them. They're old, familiar. I've lost those drawings that I did way back when. And he loved to compliment you too. He would compliment what you were doing. Because I'm down here, and I had a bad problem of using an eraser too much. So I would use coated paper with silver point, a silver wire, where I couldn't erase, couldn't correct something. And he thought that was wonderful. He said, what's this? He said, this is amazing. And we would talk about that. My eyes for close-up back in those days started to go. And I was having a little bit of a problem. And here we are, with the half glasses. Because it wasn't an affectation, it was the way he would look at things. And I never saw him without these tied around his neck. And he said to me, he said, you know, you need to get a pair. He said, you know, Dr. Clapp at Five Corners, I don't know much about him, but I bet he would be able to get you a pair of these. So I made an appointment with Dr. Clapp, and I ended up with a pair of half glasses. They're not these because I tore the house apart trying to find them, and I can't find them after 50 years. It's like where they went. I did find the thing that's holding them together, but that's something I remember about how he was working with the public, and how he loved the models. Now, as far as the models were concerned, within the few times that I was called upon to be the model, Earl Merchant would be downtown Gloucester, and he would be in Walgreens, or he would be in some place having lunch, and carried a little tiny notebook where you're sitting having lunch, minding your own business, and Earl Merchant would come up to you and say, you know, tomorrow night we're having this little group get-together at the Art Association in Rockport. And Earl would come and pick you up if you didn't have transportation to be there. Or you would sit in the back of Earl's station wagon with Winslow in the front. And you somehow got here. And on those, it was always a Saturday. What happened, I mean, whether it was a beautiful sunny day and people decided to go to the beach, but always on Saturday I ended up being the model. And I mean, and I can remember, I saw one example of what Jack Callahan had done, because the other thing I wanted to mention to all of you is that you might have 3 hours in this room, but then the artist would get you to come to their studios. Mildred Jones always had someone come. Schlemm had someone come. Priscilla Trotter would have them come over to the studio. Jack Callahan would suddenly have you come over. I was asked twice to be Priscilla Trotter's model. She had a gallery down on Bearskin Neck, and she did a painting demonstration in watercolor. Nothing is harder than to try and do a likeness of someone in watercolor. I mean, for those of us that understand that technique, Betty Lou Schlemm would catch it. My favorite time was when Martha Moore and Lou Burnett, her husband, would come here. And swear back then he was about 6'3". And they would arrive at this door and come in and set up, and he would have a canvas this big. And he's working with number 2 brushes. And he's doing this little tiny 6. She's 4'8" or 4'6". She's got this huge canvas. And she's working with a palette knife. And I'm watching her because I would sit behind them just to see what, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but the show was worth watching this. I mean, the heck with what I was creating. It was the one. And she'd take one swipe, and the arm of the model was there. I mean, it's like, God, meanwhile, he's picking. Unbelievable. But God help you if you were late. because Winslow was not happy with lateness. In winter times, we were always on time, even though you had problems maybe finding a place to park with the snow and the ice out front. But in the summertime, you had what he called transients that would arrive and suddenly fill up the Wednesday evening class that might be a core group of 6, ended up with about 16 somehow fitting in this room. I mean, it worked, but if you were late, he would get, just visualize this. He's seated with his back to you, and he hears the noise in the background, and he would stand up and he would point at the clock. He didn't say anything, but it was just like he'd sit back down. What an amazing man, and thank you so much for remembering chicken croquettes. Because one evening we ended up with what's now Brackets, that was old Leanna's, and they had phenomenal homemade chicken croquettes. And one evening we went over and I treated him to chicken croquettes when we sat, but it was the most silent of dinners that I think I've ever had. Because you would ask him a question. And if it was anything to pertain to him, there was just dead silence. He was a great conversationalist because he would bring it back to you. How are things at the Art Association? How did the last jury do? I understand you used to work at Tux. Was that a difficult job? So he would have questions to bring back to you, but if you tried to turn it over to what have you been working on, it was just dead silence. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to do this today. What an amazing, amazing artist. But Pico didn't know about him. Thank God we have people like Peter, and thank God we have you. The amazing background that you have, and all these paintings. I mean, he's still here. I still feel it. And every time I see glasses like this, I know he's still here. But thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wonderful,
Any questions for both of us? Yes.
You said that these are people from the area. Can you actually identify some of them?
No, I can't. I Catnip Bill I recognize downstairs.
I mean, this guy.
And that gentleman, I can't remember his name.
I see.
Because I came in the door the other day, right where you're standing over there, and I started to tear up. Because I remembered that name.
Yeah.
And then I came around the corner and I saw the photo of Winslow.
Well, these women that are, I mean, they just look so Gloucester, these women.
Yes.
I mean, you see these people on the street. That could be Stefano's mother right there. I don't know.
Because he had favorite models.
Yeah.
Remember her?
Yeah.
She was sitting literally almost in the same outfit right here. I mean, I remember these people because he would, I mean, and I think that's part of the great attraction he had with Earl, that the two of them could get together and pick someone that would be definitely the person that they wanted to have sit for the group. I can't remember if he ever attended the Monday evening figure drawing and painting workshops or the group. I don't remember if he did that, but I know Wednesday evening and Saturday afternoon was his bailiwick.
I mean, I keep hoping that someone will walk in here and go, "Oh my God, that's my grandmother." Yeah.
It would be absolutely wonderful, but the name is just, it's out there. I mean, you know, 2 months from now I'm going to remember who he is. I mean, this is like, you know, I mean, I have trouble remembering my own name. I mean, it's, you know.
So, you were a witness to all the portraits. Did you see any of these other?
I don't remember that one.
Did you see any of these?
I do remember that one,
Yeah.
and I do remember her, and I do remember him.
And the woman
you
that's sitting downstairs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were you exposed to any of the Pico Miran?
No. I didn't know about
They
it.
weren't around.
I mean, until I met this young lady over here a couple years ago, I didn't know
Really?
about this. And then I thought, here's the expert. He's going to know more about
But
this.
isn't it interesting?
But it's
I
amazing.
had no clue about Winslow Wilson, and you had no clue about Pico Miran.
Which bothers me, I have to say to all of you that I've just met and a few of you that I've known for a while, who else is out there? I mean, does Wayne Morrell, does he have another personality? I mean, is Paul Strizek somewhere in the West Coast that's Fred Smith? I mean, it bothers me. Which I'm sorry I'm as old as I am because I could start a new career.
Well,
Did you ever write under someone else's name?
No.
Okay, just checking.
I can barely write under my own. but you know what's so interesting is we never talked about art.
No.
We talked about literature. He was absolutely, it was extraordinary. He gave me 2 books. He gave me by the great literary critic Kenneth Burt, long dead. I mean, the figures like Edwin Wilson. He gave me 2 books by Kenneth Burt, Permanence and Change and The Philosophy of Literary Forms. And these are books that I've had ever since. And he really was able to help you understand what he believed, how he felt, how he wanted to paint, what it meant. And the other thing that I think we need to mention is, and I mention it in what I've written here, he had an absolute obsession with nuclear holocaust, with apocalypse, nuclear apocalypse. He talked about it a lot. He showed me a scrapbook that he kept of newspaper and magazine articles. I would love to know where that scrapbook is. He was very much interested in the science of it, the superstitions around it, the mass hysteria, all of these kinds of things. He did say to me that it was a very significant aspect of his painting, looking at a world from that perspective, where it had come from, where it would go.
Glad you mentioned that because I can't remember that somebody in this room will certainly know that there's a rack with there are 4 hanging balls, and if you hit one, they start bouncing back and forth. Well, Harriet Matson Wangenroth had that on her desk. And every now and then he would go in at break time. I'm sitting over here at the other desk, and he'd just walk in and go back and forth. I mean, Harriet's on the phone thinking, what the hell is he up to? I mean, it was like, okay.
Did anybody have an inkling that while he was having these classes here and doing the seascapes and portraits, that just down the street, Pico Miran was showing at the Cape Ann Society of Modern Artists?
No, I love that because they were at that end of Main Street, and here we are at
I always wanted to ask him, how did the Pico Miran paintings get to the Cape Ann Society of Modern Artists? And I never dared ask that to him.
Because that was a great group of amazing people.
Amazing artists. The long-term president, Nathaniel Dirk, he'd come up to me and say, "Hey, kid," he's a New Yorker, "what are you reading?" And there was a great deal of intellectual discussion at the Cape Ann Society of Modern Artists.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was like you felt as you walked down toward their gallery that it was light years away. The same thing, I worked for Tux for 5 years and if Tuck ran out of something, he'd send me to pools to get it. And it was like, you're going into enemy territory. The second you got to where Tom Nicholas's gallery is now, I mean, it was like, ooh, which was Curtis News. It was like, oh, do I dare go beyond that?
So Winslow showed his portraits and the seascapes at the RAA. Did he show them at the Rockport Art Association?
Not that I remember. I mean, we got to see what he was working on those Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons, and I loved that experience.
But he didn't show the paintings after they'd been finished.
Well, I'm seeing things finished that I never saw. I mean, I remember the models. even though I can't remember their names, but that's finished work, but I mean, they have started him sitting right here.
So I wonder why he didn't show them. I mean,
I have no
Because he
idea.
was a member. He
the
became a
members
member.
show.
Yeah.
Members show that's what members do.
Back in that era, you had members that just never did show. I mean, I'm sorry to say that. Do we still have people that don't show?
All the time.
All the time.
It's like
Well,
pulling
when
teeth.
he's finally
It is, I
showing
call them
them.
up, and I'm like,
I mean, my worst time for the 5 years I was here is when you had to write the jury rejection letters. I mean, Harriet and I would be in the dumps for, a day or two because it was so difficult to have to do that. Or Harriet, God bless her, would be on the phone saying, there's a show coming up. You really should bring something in for the jury because it's like, are you going to show this season? You've paid your dues. You attend these classes and these groups and you show up for annual meeting. Where are you going to really show? And God bless her, she would get things out of people that was like, okay.
I mean, I wonder what it was like. I mean, I don't know how many did he sell out of the Cape Ann Society of Modern Arts, or did he not sell any?
No, Peter.
I have no idea. I would see the paintings there,
Right.
and as the shows changed, there would be new paintings. Some of these I remember. There were others that are not in this show, but I've seen that. But I have no idea if he sold.
I have to ask,
Do you know?
not to put you on the spot, but are there more works?
Yes.
I mean, hundreds more? Or?
I don't know how many more. They are spread, a majority of them are spread that I'm aware of in the family or with my father's best friend. But I'm sure he sold them. I know he had a show at Beau's Gallery.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
those
absolutely.
were, I believe, primarily seascapes, or maybe exclusively seascapes, and that they were available for sale there. Beau's would not confirm how many sold, nor the pricing of them,
Right.
but they did compare his works to Frederick Waugh.
Because this is what I remember for him. These I don't. Definitely not that. I mean, it's just, we somehow we typecast people. I think of Aldro Hibbert, and the first thing you think about Aldro Hibbert is the snow scenes. And yet he did phenomenal figure painting. He did phenomenal nudes and phenomenal portraiture. But we get typecast. It's like it's some sort of thing that we do.
And he was a good umpire for the baseball games.
True, yes, I remember that.
Hibbert or Winslow?
Hibbert with baseball. Yes.
And she
This piece in the corner has a very modern feel, but then there's this woman looking down. So my question is she a face you recognize from the portrait group?
I do recognize her,
You do recognize?
and I recognize him.
Okay.
That's a face that I think I've sketched in this room.
Same.
I mean, I'm not, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's why I teared up when I came around the corner and saw it, because there's something marvelous about seeing works of art that bring you back to that moment. That's what I love about life, is the fact that we have this, it's like, wow, time stands still. Even though I still want to know what the heck Jack Callahan was doing back then. Because that would drive us nuts. God bless Betty Lou, who would be over here minding her own business, and then she'd look around, she'd say, I'd hear a whisper, he's left the room. She would kind of meander, take a look, and come back and sit down. And it was like, oh, okay.
Is it true that Wilson said that her brushwork was a little noisy?
I never heard that.
I read somewhere. Is that a truth?
Did he say that?
Betty Lou told us
She
that.
said that.
Yeah, Betty Lou.
Yeah.
Because I was amazed with what this space would be like when it was a still life set up behind me. And the cloth, they very carefully chose the fabric, and then you had them in her painting. And she would just, I loved it, because that's how you learn about art, is watching these professional artists create. And I've had so many artists say to me, I don't know how I did that. And I've thought, no, I've always thought, I don't think they do know how they did it. I mean, you know, a name I shouldn't mention, but John Terrelak, God bless him, who hung every show in this association for years. And here he is with these huge hands, and he'd see some delicate thing that he worked on, and go, I don't know how I did that. And I thought, I don't think you know. It's like,
It's kind of fun as John was in my class at Vesta George.
oh wow.
Yes, and Don Stone was our teacher.
Yeah, oh, you bet.
And it was really Don who was his mentor and brought John along. And then, of course, I knew him as Mr. Callahan,
Yes.
would occasionally come and teach. And
Well, Jack Callahan's gallery and studio was right next to Don on
Yes.
South Street.
And then there was Bill Flynn. What happened to him?
Don't know.
He was wonderful.
Oh, yeah. I remember the name.
So it was a very special time that, you know, you could study with these wonderful artists.
Oh, yeah. But I think we're very fortunate in 2019 to still have this amazing place still here. And to know that, as Harrison Katie said, art is alive in Rockport. Picked a town and chose to live here, and it's prospered. And that man was amazing. Because Harrison Katie with the rabbits and all the little, and then occasionally, in fact, I have him at home, a Harrison Katie nude, which is not a Harrison Katie nude of a rabbit. It's not a forest animal, and I was like, what? You know, but that's, see, again, typecasting.
So Betty Lou Schlemm shared a story with us when we met her actually in this room, that she was living in New Jersey. I think it was in the late 1950s, and she was traveling up here on the weekends to be in the portraiture class, in the sketch, maybe the sketch group, and she talked about the group getting together during breaks, maybe it was lunchtime downstairs or in a side room here,
Right.
And she said it was a very, very close group.
Oh, yes.
That she came up here every weekend from New Jersey. She was working in New York City, and then eventually she relocated here.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it was in large part to the relationship she had made and the feeling of the art community here in Rockport that drew her from New Jersey to become a permanent resident
Because you
here.
never felt walking into either Wednesday night or Saturday afternoon and also Monday night, you never felt as if you were an outsider. I mean, even the people that came and were here for a few months in the summertime, it was still that enveloping. But again, you had the discipline from Winslow to set the pace with the clock. And God help you if you're over here and the model is posing and you're still talking about something. Because he did not want to hear that. The other thing that would occasionally, the Earl Merchant would tell him that it was time for the break, and then Winslow was in charge. He didn't tell him it was time for the break. But I still remember the first time I posed and I had to look at the X, and he made certain, he said, don't stare at it. It's going to make your eyes look buggy. Just sit there and relax and remember what your position is. Still remember that. But it was not easy being the model. I've got to say that about doing this. Particularly if I was in the midst of doing something for Harriet in there on a Saturday afternoon and it was 5 after 2 and I knew, uh-oh, there he is at the door, looking over his half glasses saying the model didn't show up. And Harriet wouldn't get up. Harriet's too busy. I mean, it's like, so.
I believe it's also interesting that there is a portrait of Winslow that was done by Earl Merchant.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
And vice versa.
Right, okay.
That I believe the portrait of Winslow done by Earl Merchant is property of the RAA.
Nice. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Because they got along, I have to say that. I mean, this was amazing. I just couldn't quite understand what Earl was doing. Because Earl counted the number of shoelaces. If there was a pattern on your socks, it was there, and it was. Because I'd look at the person walking out and I'd think, my God, there's art checks on his socks. I mean, it was like...
Hundreds of his portraits
both of them, well, all of them were amazing, but it wasn't, you're correct, because there were refreshments downstairs. I had forgotten about that. The tea kettle was always on. Oh, yeah. And then that break suddenly, but then he would remind you that the model was waiting. So it was like, you know, because there was this internal, was he that way as you remember him with a clock?
He passed away when I was very young.
Oh, okay.
So I
Do you
don't.
remember him with a clock at all? The need to be, 7:58, 28 seconds.
No, I mean, it was,
Peter's always punctual.
I was just gonna say. I would notice.
Because I'm sorry, I don't know if it's Tuesday or Thursday. I dated a check the other day, March. At least I got the first letter right, but I'm like, okay. But thanks again.
thank you.